I've come to think that hedging for startups isn't a great idea. Like resources are so limited and time is so limited before you run out of cash or before the market catches up to you competitively on a given idea, that I think it's usually best once you have a direction to just run in it, unless you have incredibly strong conviction that the market has changed.
Hi, listeners. Welcome to It's the People, our interview series where we explore the inside story of building companies and investment portfolios with high-octane founders, limited partners, and fund managers. We hope these conversations push you to be even better at what you do. I'm Wills Hapworth, and in this episode, my partner Andy Greenfield and I got to interview Sean Grundy, who is the CEO and co-founder of Bevi. Bevi is a network of smart water coolers for the office, dispensing flavored and sparkling water, all built on a bottleless supply chain. Sean became passionate about the environment when in undergrad at Princeton and turned his passion into a business reality after completing business school at MIT. In this interview, we discussed a range of topics, including his belief that big impacts for the world need to come from business solutions. These changes have to happen in the market. His view that the impact from software alone is limited, and if you want to have a big impact, you have to build physical infrastructure to affect big change. His deeply thoughtful strategy along the way of building this business that has gone into so many important decisions made at the company, and Sean's belief that hedging for startups is a bad idea. To start things off, Sean begins the conversation with his life story in 60 seconds.
Before we begin, we'd like to note that this interview is for informational purposes only, and that the opinions expressed should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Sean, really excited that you're joining us today on our interview series. And we like to start these interviews with the same question. Can you give us the Sean Grundy life story in 60 seconds or less?
Yes. I'm from New Jersey. Like, I was born in New York, but then my parents moved out of the city to have more space for two kids. I went actually to high school in New York again, and then went to Princeton for college. I would say I had honestly a very relaxed, and I think compared to a lot of kids today, like it was actually a pretty easy childhood. I was a philosophy major in college, more just because I found the subject very interesting. To be honest, it was actually one of the subjects I was worst at. It was one of the subjects I had the hardest time with, but I just found it really interesting. After college, I went to an environmental NGO. I actually briefly worked at a corporate research firm, then went to an environmental NGO. I also at one point took a full almost year off to live in Brazil, just to travel and have essentially a gap year. That was when I was 23. My NGO work took me to China, where I was working actually on water quality projects, among other things. And I went to business school at MIT with the goal of basically combining an environmental purpose and combining work that had an environmental impact with something that was more entrepreneurial, just because the entrepreneurial itch was always present in some form or other. And I ended up starting Bevi coming out of business school, and that was now over 10 years ago.
And
so lots of years of work.
As you look back on that that story, and we're going to dive into Bevi for sure, were there any key moments in your early development that jump out when you think about them and had, a disproportionate impact on the life that you ultimately lived?
Like moments from childhood or pre-Bevi?
Sure. What comes to mind? Could be childhood, pre-Bevi, but like your young years.
There were a number of entrepreneurs in my family, which at least encouraged me to explore that as an option. Like my uncle and aunt ran a company for a few decades. My grandfather had some, actually on both sides, my mom's father and my dad's father had some business endeavors over the years. So I'd say there was always interest in that type of thing in my family. Although of our generation, like me, my brother, and my cousins, I realized I've been the only one. Well, actually, no, I was the only one to start a business, and then one of my cousins more recently just started one. Um, so I think the family impact was there, and then I'd say just in general, I I've always been somewhat probably like I've probably had some level of authority problem. Like I've always had this weird mixture of wanting to do well in school and trying to like achieve some of the conventional um, definitions of success while also while also wanting to like change some of the rules and not follow some of the rules. So I think in a lot of founders there's there's this sense of like the status quo isn't enough or the status quo doesn't feel right. And I would say that that applies to me too, where I've always wanted to do things like my own way.
I'm curious, Sean, just springboarding off of Will's question about whether there were any sort of events or things that happened. You talked about what sort of produced that entrepreneurial orientation, but you have something else as well, which is a passion for things environmental.
To be honest, there's no like event in particular, but I always spent a lot of time in nature. I was always, from the youngest age I can remember, very into like nature TV shows. Like I would actually buy, at the time of like VHSs and DVDs, I would actually get tapes of like nature documentaries and then keep rewatching the same ones. So it was always something that I found fascinating. And I would say that as I got to college, I started becoming aware of the extent to which we're just degrading and destroying natural environments. I remember, I think it was around when I graduated college that like An Inconvenient Truth came out, and that was pretty jarring for me. And as I started right after college, I was working in a corporate job, and to be honest, there were very smart colleagues and it was a good company, but I just found I had a really hard time caring about the work. Like it didn't feel important. And the more I learned about environmental issues, the more I felt like that was where I should be contributing. And I knew that that was an area that I'd stay very motivated in. And then when I actually went to work for an environmental NGO, I was there for 3 years and I loved the nature of the work. Like I loved that we were learning about ecosystems. We were learning about ways to prevent pollution, ways to conserve species. That part was really fascinating to me. But I'd say I struggled with the relative small scale of it. And it was the most apparent actually when I went to China, because we were working there with China's State Forestry Administration, and there were actually within the government, within that agency, a lot of people that genuinely shared this passion for protecting the environment, and people willing to like work very hard and sacrifice a lot. But their power was basically meaningless next to the business interests. Like I remember actually I got to go to some really beautiful nature reserves there, but I remember going to one nature reserve where they have like the last remaining population, or one of the last remaining populations of like a dolphin type species called the finless porpoise. And there's a whole reserve built around it. It's a beautiful place. And there are like industrial mining operations a mile away, like half a mile away, like upriver, just like, and there's nothing that NGOs or government environmental groups can do against the strength of the business interests and the need to boost the economy.
Like deck chairs on the Titanic, kind of.
Exactly. And seeing things like that really made me feel like environmental solutions have to come largely from business, because business interests are just so powerful. And when you look at like the size of, if you were to look at like the annual revenue, or maybe from a nonprofit perspective, like the annual investments or donations for like Coca-Cola versus like World Wildlife Fund, you pretty quickly realize who's more powerful and who's going to be able to run the show. And it made me think that for environmental changes to really scale and really stick, they have to happen in the market. And I would say in particular, I got interested in hardware companies and physical product companies because your impact from software alone, your environmental impact from software alone is pretty limited. Like you'll always be limited to optimizing the existing physical infrastructure, but to really make leaps and bounds, the physical infrastructure has to change.
Just one quickie, one sidestep. I'm curious about philosophy, studying philosophy. Did that have any role or bearing on how you think and how you run your business?
It did. It did, for sure. And what I'd say is like not in a way that's better or worse, but just in a way that's different from the way I might have thought had I studied economics or engineering or business or something else. And I do think ultimately it's really valuable for companies to have a pool of people who think in diverse ways. And if one solves problems like an engineer, and one solves problems like a designer, and one solves problems like an economist, it can also help to have one solve problems the way a philosopher or a philosophy student would. And I'd say it applies in a couple of ways. The first is honestly in the mission itself. Like a big part of why I studied philosophy, it was to understand the field of ethics, not in the way we think about it in like a popular life perspective, like not ethics in the sense of right and wrong, so much as ethics in the sense of like, what should we be doing with our lives overall? Like what does a good life look like, and what should our goals be? That always fascinated me, and I think that's why in a normal corporate job I felt so unfulfilled. Like I felt like I wasn't serving a purpose, and that I really struggled with that. I really struggled with the sense that like if the company I was working at versus any number of our direct competitors succeeded and the others failed, what difference would it really make? Probably none. Whereas where I'm working now with Bevi, if we succeed versus if a single-use bottled beverage company succeeds, it actually makes a real difference on the world. And that's how I wanted to feel. So I think part of where philosophy helped was just this need to have a mission and need to like build a business around a mission. On a more operational basis, I do think like the analytical rigor of the way philosophy is taught today, where you kind of always have to be aware of what you really know versus what you think you know, but is actually an assumption, and the ability to think through how if one assumption proves to be wrong, or if one assumption might be like weak, what does that mean for the rest of your arguments, and how does that then inform your strategy? After studying philosophy, it's kind of come naturally in business, and it's actually very useful because often we're operating off of assumptions we think are real, and it really helps to know for sure if something is true or if it isn't, and to know where there might be opportunities to innovate by really questioning an assumption and finding out if it's real or not.
I know Andy's cracking up right now because I've known him for 15 years, and if there's like a catchphrase that encapsulates Andy, it's, do you think this or do you know this? Knowledge versus belief. Maybe it's a segue into
doing that a lot at work. Yeah.
Well, so maybe this is an interesting segue into Bevi because our listeners want to learn more about the business. I was thinking about the company, everything that you've just said, and actually the last thing you just said, which was, the corporate job I was in, if one competitor beat another, it didn't matter, whereas we can have a big impact in Bevi's case against the competition. Let me ask maybe a charged question here to get into Bevi. Do you know or do you think Bevi is better for the planet?
we know. So it's not hard to be better than single-use bottled beverages. So which is how we know. Um, if you look at the top plastic polluters globally across industries, like including anything in CPG, like manufacturing, oil and gas, the top plastic polluters are beverage companies. There's now a nonprofit group that puts out an annual audit of plastic pollution globally. And the top three companies on the list are usually Coke, Pepsi, and Nestle. And Keurig's up there too. So it's an incredibly wasteful industry in terms of the amount of plastic produced. And in addition to like all of the greenhouse gas concerns related to plastic, there's also so much just like physical contamination of our environments and ultimately of our bodies. Like microplastics are now being found absolutely everywhere in tap water, unless it's well filtered, in bottled water, in nearly all ecosystems, and also inside our bodies. And increasingly, it's being linked to health concerns. And to be honest, it was actually pretty disturbing to see the bottled beverage industry's initial reaction to these findings of microplastics everywhere, because the initial reaction was like, oh, there's no cause for alarm. No studies have yet proved that this is bad for human health. But then as studies are getting done, it's not looking good. And then beyond the plastic itself, just so much fuel gets used to transport bottled beverages from point A to point B. So you could make a lot of improvements to the plastic pollution problem by switching to from single-use bottled water in a plastic bottle to single-use bottled water in like a aluminum container or even paper container. But the carbon footprint is still really high because ultimately it's just expensive to truck full bottles of water. And what's really nice about Bevi's business model is we cut out all trucking of water and all basically it's like all of the associated plastic and the associated fuel. It's a really meaningful impact on an industry that has historically been like one of the worst offenders in terms of pollution.
So as one more follow-up, and then I'll cede my airtime, and we'll get into Bevi. My next question, and you talked about, solutions that you believe can have a real impact have to come through the market. But plastic is so convenient. And I mean, I'm a perpetrator. I've walked into gas stations without my bottle, forgot it, opened up the cooler, and I grabbed a plastic container full of water. I was dumb. I was bad. But it's
honestly, even I'll do it on like an airplane.
Yeah, it's so convenient. And I was actually in the train, Penn Station yesterday, and one of the stores I bought a glass bottle from, wouldn't you know it, I left the glass bottle on my luggage as I was walking, and it smashed all over the floor. And I was thinking about our interview today, and I was like, I wonder if Penn Station may ban glass because of things like this, because plastic, that wouldn't have happened. Plastic is so convenient. As you've thought about building a successful company, and listen, Nestle, Coke, the companies you mentioned, they built massive businesses built on plastic because it has its value. It has its value, right?
Yeah, it's affordable and it's convenient.
How do you think about trying to compete against their size and the convenience of this product and trying to build, a bigger, better business? Like, how do you solve both of those needs or all the competing interests?
Yeah. What bottled beverage companies did extremely well is offer a product that's just incredibly convenient and relatively affordable. And there is also a good degree of quality control that they can provide with the single-use containers. Like that I think is one of the big benefits of the bottled beverage industry, that they can in a plant every day test the water quality. They can make sure the right ingredients are being put into a beverage, and they can like observe that happening and essentially guarantee that what you're getting is what they tell you you're getting. And that, coupled with the convenience and the relative affordability, is a compelling value proposition. I'll say that what beverage companies have also done is really built brands around that packaging. Like that is really their point of differentiation, much more so than the beverage itself. Like very few people in say the water business could actually taste the difference between many of the bottled water brands out there, but they'll know the packaging. Like they'll know the Evian packaging, and that will connote some kind of like quality assurance to them. We realized that for Bevi to compete in a bottle-free system, our value proposition couldn't just rely on environmentalism. Like we could not rely on people to actively choose sustainability over convenience and quality. And the challenge for us, therefore, became we needed to offer a solution that, in addition to being much more sustainable, was actually both more affordable and also more convenient than single-use bottles. And that's what we set out to do. We designed these internet-connected machines in part to be able to ensure that the beverage experience was actually good, and to remotely, in an automated fashion, implement some of the same controls that bottled beverage companies would do in a bottling plant, but in thousands of distributed machines. But those controls are still very important, and show our customers that the water is being correctly filtered, filters are being changed on time. When you select the flavor, it's actually going to be in there. The mixing is happening correctly. The temperature is going to be right. Basically, the IoT system enables us to control quality, and that's gone over really well with our customers. Just because that way they develop a consistent experience using our machines and drinking our beverages.
Hey, Sean, I have to jump in, and please forgive me, but I'm thinking about our listeners. We're talking all about Bevi. You haven't yet described what Bevi actually is.
Sure, I should do that. So Bevi's a company I started in 2013. Our product is also called Bevi, and we make internet-connected machines for purified regular water, sparkling water, flavored water, and vitamin-infused water. So we play in this general like flavored, sparkling, and enhanced water industry. And we go to market B2B. We sell or lease our machines to primarily offices, but also more and more to hotels, schools, gyms, and a variety of other commercial locations. Our machines are designed for relatively high volume scenarios where there are at least 25 people on site on a daily basis. And at this point, we have a pretty large and like consistent track record of going into companies that used to offer single-use bottles of water, single-use cans of seltzer, and other beverages, other bottled beverages to their employees on a daily basis. And we have a really good track record now of stripping out refrigerators that used to be stocked with these bottled beverages every day and putting in Bevi machines that offer a similar variety of beverages in a really fast and convenient manner without the single-use bottles, and most importantly, without trucking full bottles of water.
Got it. So from one perspective, somebody could say, Sean, you are insane. Why would you start a company that's competing against, as Will's mentioned, convenience, portability, all that wonderful stuff, and competing against the biggest and most sophisticated marketers on the planet? It's not like you're competing against some mom and pop shop or it's some, dormant industry. You're competing against the behemoths. Like, how did you end up doing that?
That's right. It is funny. And I remember seeing even an interview with Richard Branson where he talked about his foray into the soda business, and his big takeaway was like, you don't compete with Coke and Pepsi. It doesn't work. But this is where the mission gave us the confidence and the ambition to try. where we realized that, hey, these companies have such a massive negative environmental impact. For us to for us to have an impact, we have to become a behemoth ourselves. Like we also have to get big. That means we have to raise a lot of money. We have to eventually build a large team. We have to operate at serious scale. It really forced us to take this go big or go home approach. Like we never had there are a lot of times startups have to make decisions of, do we want to stay a small business and grow more slowly, or do we want to raise tons of venture capital and grow really fast? And for us, because of the mission, it was never really a choice. Like we had to raise a lot of venture capital and grow really fast, because if we really want to make an impact, we have to do it at serious scale. And it means we eventually have to be a global business, and we eventually need to have our product offer a pretty wide variety of beverages to actually like to genuinely disrupt the beverage industry. What I'd say though, from a strategy perspective, is we don't think about ourselves competing on the same plane as like Coke, Pepsi, Nestle, or these other large beverage companies. We think about competing on a different, almost in a different sport. And the strength of these companies tends to be in their branding and in their distribution. They have distribution deals all over the world with retailers, in restaurants, in high schools and universities. Like they have these massive distribution contracts everywhere. And the one place that many of the big beverage companies don't have strong distribution contracts is actually in offices. And that's a big part of the reason that we started in offices, so that while we do eventually intend to compete in all of these markets, and to some extent we already are, but we decided to make our focus the section of the market where they were weakest. And it's still a really large segment of the market. It's just it's I'd say where we have the biggest comparative advantage. And then I also view it almost in like, I think about it almost like a cage fight, like a UFC fight, where if someone's a really good boxer, then like you better be a really good wrestler and like take them to the ground and basically fight a different fight from the one they fight. And they were really strong at brand marketing. Like they're incredible with it, with like celebrity sponsors, with these amazing ad campaigns. They obviously, of course, also have this history of brand loyalty, which really helps them. Part of the reason we chose the sparkling and flavored water category is because brand loyalty there was a lot weaker than it was in soda and in certain other types of beverages. And again, we might have, I don't know, maybe someday Bevi will offer like better for you sodas or some kind of more equivalent product. But we realized there's this massive multi-billion-dollar water market where no one has very strong brand loyalty. So let's compete there. And then most importantly, we really compete on our engineering skills rather than on our marketing skills. Like we do have talented marketers at Bevi, but in terms of our core competency as a business, it's absolutely engineering. Like it's really product development. And we knew that even though these companies are gigantic and very wealthy and incredibly sophisticated, they're not tech companies, and they don't have impressive in-house expertise when it comes to developing amazing hardware or developing amazing IoT solutions. And by competing in this area, we're basically changing the dynamic. We're saying like, okay, you can do all the marketing you want, but can you create a product that works like this well, this consistently, with this smooth of a user experience that's so nimble in terms of like our ability to keep pushing software updates and keep improving the experience. And what I'd say also is, because of the strength of our mission, like this environmental mission that really resonates with a lot of people, we've been able to attract a level of talent that previously never really considered joining the beverage industry. Like we have people leaving top software companies and top robotics companies to join Bevi. And in general, they're folks that never would have applied to a job at Coke or Pepsi or Nestle, but they're really motivated by Bevi's mission. So I think we're able to attract this next level talent, which in turn helps us compete. But if I were to sum it up, I'd say we try to be strong in all the areas they're weak. And then we try to be like good enough in all the areas they're strong.
Sean, I'm just curious, like, as you lay that out, sounds like a really thoughtful plan of attack. And I'm curious, how much of that was there at the get-go versus you've intuited and is now part of the story you tell?
It is funny. I actually have like a slide in a deck where I basically lay out how Bevi for offices makes sense, because there was this gap in the market of like a device that served sparkling and flavored and purified water in a commercial environment. And it looks like it was very deliberate, but in reality, there was just so much trial and error. So I think a lot of what I'm saying is candidly revisionist history, where we were just trying to find something that had an environmental impact and that people liked. And we kept iterating until we did that. And it was candidly only, I think, as we started scaling and questioning, like, wait, why are competitors taking so long to copy us? Like, why aren't we engaged in more competitive sales conversations? And for a really long time, we were just the only game in town. And yeah. So I think it's, if I'm being candid, I think it's rationalizing afterward why we've been able to continue competing.
Hey, Sean, can I wrestle with you just a little bit here? Because, you mentioned that Coke and Pepsi, they're amazing brand marketers, they're amazing marketers. And you're competing against them because your core competency is engineering. My pushback on that is you still have to go in and sell to office managers who are also being hit on by Coke, Pepsi, the folks who distribute their products. Office managers who have limited budgets, have limited space, have, customers, I'll put that word in quotes, the people who work there, who are very used to walking in and opening the fridge and saying, where's my Diet Coke, or using the machine to get it. So you had to be pretty damn good at crafting a message that was capable of both penetrating the clutter and getting people to change behavior. Can you talk about how the hell you did that? Because that, to me, is, the engineering's amazing in the Bevi machines, but that's also, what I just described is a pretty massive challenge.
Yes. So what we saw is that there really was this gap in the market for a product like Bevi when we were starting. In the home, there were products like SodaStream that were quite popular, that people would use to make their own water sparkling. There were products like Brita filters that people would use to filter their own water. But when we looked at commercial locations, we saw that the norm was for regular water to have a water cooler that would either filter the water or use those like 5-gallon jugs to dispense water. But for flavored and sparkling water and sodas and other beverages, the norm across many industries was to just stock a refrigerator every day with bottled beverages. Mm-hmm. And what we found as we researched market opportunities was that, first of all, that was expensive, and Bevi could help because it's just a lot cheaper. Like, our marginal cost of creating a drink is much lower than the cost of a bottled beverage. So we realized that for commercial locations where we could take the hardware expense of the machine and allocate it across a large number of users, then the incremental costs of dispensing beverages was actually very low. So we realized that we could offer this meaningful cost savings proposition. And that helped us, I'd say, get our foot in the door to a lot of companies who for one reason or other were open or looking to cut costs. What helped us the most from a sales perspective against bottled and canned beverages was it was actually the time savings. And to be honest, none of us like foresaw this when we were doing our initial like concept development and came up with the idea for Bevi. None of us thought about this, but someone in the office, typically the office manager, or in a larger company, a facilities team, has to stock that refrigerator every day. And that means they're going to a storage room, bringing like a 12-pack or 24-pack of bottled beverages over, opening it up, stocking the refrigerator, and then going and placing new orders as needed for other beverages. And it might take them like 10 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day, depending on the setup of their office. Believe it or not, there are companies like when we visit some of these corporate campuses in the Bay Area, there are people who have told us they spend a day a week going from floor to floor, stocking refrigerators. And it's work that nobody really likes doing. And we realized that time savings element that Bevi offers, since, right, like we have dense concentrates in our machines that don't need to be replaced often, the time savings that Bevi offers by not making people stock refrigerators ended up being a really important part of our pitch. And one of the
I remember we spoke to many of them when we were diligencing. Those were fun conversations.
Yeah, it resonated early, and we were surprised by that. So, and I remember the phrase we kept hearing was that it was a no-brainer. The phrase we kept hearing was like, wait, so this will save me a lot of time, save me a lot of money, still give people the beverages they want, but also help us be more green. Like also help us kind of live by our sustainability statements. Like, we kept hearing that it was a no-brainer. And when we kept hearing that phrase, that's when I realized we actually had some significant product market fit. And another thing I'll say benefits from a sales perspective is when we call into an account, often the person who answers the phone is the office manager. Like, it's literally often the same person who's stocking the refrigerator and who kind of becomes Bevi's best friend. And that to me is like a real advantage in our sales process, because it's not just something that like other people in the office are going to like. It's like the person answering the phone is directly the beneficiary of our product. And in most sales processes, you're actually trying to like get past the office manager and pitch to somebody else. But in our case, it's a very efficient sales process. So we were able to come up with a scalable approach.
So interesting. The one thing I'm super curious about, I'm going to stay on the theme of Sean Grundy's crazy, is you are a hardware entrepreneur. I realize there's software in there, obviously, but you're doing something that most of us looking from the outside would say, well, that's a way, way heavier lift than developing a new software product. You don't need a different species of engineer. You don't need designers. You don't need manufacturing. You don't need, piles of cash to finance the equipment. Sean, you got to be crazy. Why do that?
Yeah, it's expensive.
It is. And you've written, I think, really eloquently on, why building hardware is a really smart kind of business to do, defensible, et cetera. But could you talk for a second about the decision to do something that's so freaking hard?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it probably helped that I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. And I remember when we were fundraising early on, sometimes I would talk to investors who made their money in a hardware business. Like they were sometimes maybe like the COO or CEO of a hardware business. And even they would sometimes tell me, oh no, I don't invest in hardware. It's too risky. And they were kind of like, I'm done with that. Like, so I do think from a mission perspective, it was just never a question for us. Like, if we really wanted to change the beverage industry, or really most other industries, right? Whether we're thinking about renewable energy or reducing consumption, or making anything more efficient, there usually has to be a hardware element. Like ultimately, the impact we're having on the world is physical, and I think we need physical solutions to reduce that impact. So it was never really a question. but I will say that it's really difficult, especially in the beginning. Like the cost of mistakes is really high. The cost of building the business in general is high, but one mistake really can kill you. Like mistakes are not easily reversible when your physical products are already in the field and have already been manufactured. So that's challenging. And then there are a lot of areas of the business where just discipline's so important and where alignment's so important, like making sure the manufacturing plans, operational plans, financial plans, and engineering plans are all very well aligned, and sales plans, of course, because it can be particularly dangerous to build too much product and not be able to sell it. So I do think it takes this like extreme level of operational discipline, although that's also been really fun, and it kind of becomes a barrier to entry. Like with hardware, there do tend to be barriers to entry around patents and around in some cases distribution contracts and other areas. But I think the complexity of the business itself can really become a barrier to entry. Like so much know-how, there has to be so much know-how to set up a supply chain, choose the right manufacturer, work with them to actually like make sure the product is meeting its specifications. There's so much know-how behind the engineering, especially when you layer in the IoT element, that it can become really difficult to copy. Like looking at it from the outside, it would be really hard to figure out what exactly we're doing that's making it all work.
Like a trade secret.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're talking about a bunch of things that you can try to control. And then for entrepreneurs, there's all these things that are totally out of your control. And you guys faced a really big one. Building on Andy's theme of Sean is crazy. Pandemic comes along. Your business is built on offices. People are no longer in offices. You double down. You guys dig in, batten down the hatches, raise capital, stay the course. Can you talk us through like what it took to survive through that period, come out the other end, and now be on a path that looks like thriving?
Yes. So COVID was terrible for us. It was this complete shock where we really went from like true hyper growth, like at a minimum growing 100% year over year, hiring like crazy, investing in all areas of the business. Like really from a manufacturing perspective, our whole focus was just scaling. It was like, how do we build enough machines to meet demand? It went from all of these challenges to keep up with the growth to all of a sudden questioning whether we even had a market and whether any customers would be left. So yeah, when COVID hit, it hit us in mid-March 2020, and our sales pipeline just entirely disappeared when people started working from home. And we ended up pretty quickly realizing how existential of a crisis it was for us.
Like what month? Well, what month did you realize this is existential?
We moved pretty fast. Like we did 2 heavy layoffs that collectively cut the team in half, and the first layoff was in March. So we moved.
Wow.
To be honest, it was really jarring. Like we had a board meeting the first week of March that was still all focused on growth because the agenda had been set about a week before, and it was all about growth and hiring. And a couple of people canceled their travel that week thinking, just in case this COVID ends up taking off, probably better not to travel. And in it, we touched on COVID as something that could be possible. Like we touched on it as like, hey, this might affect our business for a few months. So let's be prepared to like pause spend. And literally 2 weeks after that board meeting in mid-March, we had a call to plan layoffs. Like it happened so fast. So yeah, we unfortunately had to lay off the team. Luckily, we moved fast enough that we actually had a decent budget to be able to give people healthy severance. And one thing I'm really happy about is that since then, we've been able to hire a lot of people back, which has been great. But our strategy came down to a couple of factors. One is like we had to totally redefine success because we had a much smaller team, a nearly impossible sales environment. It just wouldn't make sense to keep pushing for any of the goals we had initially thought about. And we redefined success to be focused on just keeping machines in the field, not about revenue, not about, to some extent about cost management. We did, of course, focus on that. But the main focus was just like keep machines in the field at all costs. If that means the machines are free, that's fine. They'll be free. If it means we're giving a huge discount, okay, let's give a huge discount. But like we want them in the field. And we had to just cling on to this belief that people would eventually return to offices. And we wanted to make sure that if and when they did, they had a Bevi and it was going to still be there for them. Every month during the pandemic, if we sold as many new machines as got churned, that was like a really successful month. So not decreasing our install base was a good month, which is kind of sad because before that, I had actually been the one constantly hammering this message about if we're not in hyper growth, we're dying. So for me, it was really jarring too to have to personally accept that that was no longer the world we were in, and then to like try to rally the team around this new goal of just survival. And we did also have a lot of people leave the company, right? Like understandably, after layoffs, there were a lot of people that were worried about our financial stability. There were people that just didn't believe offices would ever make a comeback. And that I think is honestly, it's a very reasonable opinion. But I appreciate that others, including me, were crazy enough to believe that this market would recover. But yeah, we really prioritized long-term customer relationships and we're willing to give on any contract terms in order to keep customers happy and in order to keep them as customers. And then from a product development perspective, we did essentially make this bet and double down on offices. Like at the time, we were about halfway through the engineering and design work for our second generation commercial machine, which was actually a more expensive, fancier, more featured product for offices. And it seemed like the craziest thing to be designing at a time when every week there were articles in major newspapers arguing that offices would never make a comeback and people would be working remotely forever. But the approach we took there was basically like a wager, right? Where if offices never made a comeback, we were probably going to die anyway. Like maybe we could scramble and come up with a huge
very
pivot.
Philosophical approach to the
I know, right? Like if we made this huge pivot to consumer, maybe we'd succeed, maybe we wouldn't, but that would involve a whole new series of risks. And then also we'd honestly be in a terrible position anyway, because we would have burned through all this capital to build the commercial business, which no longer was being supported. Whereas if we doubled down on the office market and just continued designing the best products for that market, if the market did then recover, we'd be in like the best position because no competitor would be crazy enough to be designing the type of products we were designing during COVID. Like either the small competitors wouldn't have the resources or the big competitors would probably be focused on consumer opportunities. For us, we decided that if we purely focused on this opportunity, if the market recovered, we'd be in a great position. And if it didn't recover, we'd go bankrupt. But realistically, we'd probably go bankrupt anyway if it didn't recover, even if we pivoted. So we didn't pivot. In that way, staying the course was like, it was not the obvious decision given the uncertainty in the market, but it ended up being a really good decision for us because we did see hybrid work actually make a comeback. I'd say even better than we had predicted, to be honest.
super contrarian, because we know stories that went the other way. They bobbed, weaved, pivoted however they could, and they ended up in a situation where it was like they didn't quite know what their business was coming out of the pandemic.
I've come to think that hedging for startups isn't a great idea. Like resources are so limited and time is so limited before you run out of cash or before the market catches up to you competitively on a given idea, that I think it's usually best once you have a direction to just run in it, unless you have incredibly strong conviction that the market has changed.
I think you just gave me the title for this interview. Hedging for startups isn't a great idea. I love that.
Yeah, but the truth is, Sean, that I can't begin to imagine the thinking behind the decision to double down versus doing what a huge number of entrepreneurs did, which was pivot. But the way you framed it is, hey, we're either going to succeed or we're going to fail either of the other ways if offices don't come back. We sunk all our cash into a B2B product. Now have to do B2C.
Exactly. I actually remember thinking like, hey, if we were really switching to B2C, I should just start a new company that does B2C beverages and then start fresh. But I'm really glad. I think it was definitely the best thing for Bevi that we stayed focused on commercial, because we were able to, not only were we able to leverage our past knowledge and kind of continue building this momentum, but we also ended up doing way better in terms of revenue than we thought we would. Like we ended up actually growing revenue in 2020 and in 2021, not by much, but by a little bit each year. And it turned out that our contracts were a lot stickier than we had expected them to be. And that hybrid work came back, or kind of came into fashion a little sooner than we expected it to. So in the end, I feel really lucky that we stayed the course.
Yeah. I mean, well, what do they say? Luck favors the well-prepared. I'm curious. So what is the next chapter for Bevi?
We're now in true scale-up mode, where it's really all about growth and efficiency, although we do have an active product roadmap as well. Some of the exciting things this year, in general, we're still just heavily focused on expanding into offices and other commercial locations. But some of the exciting initiatives this year are, we're going to Europe for the first time. We'll be launching in the UK and Ireland later this year, and then in more European countries soon. So that's really exciting. We've been getting pull from Europe for a long time, but it'll be a big win to finally make it happen. We're working on new business models, some that involve different payment systems. Like an example of something we're working on is putting Bevi machines in gyms and letting people making plain purified water free for everybody, but letting people sign up for a monthly subscription to the flavored and enhanced water. So essentially offering Bevi as like kind of a hybrid amenity and paid item in different locations. And then we're still really active with our product roadmap and just trying to design new machines. I'm purposely keeping this a little vague, but we're trying to do new machines for different types of locations.
Got it. So, and I want to be mindful of time here. Any advice? You're a mission-driven guy, and there's plenty of folks out there who are, whether they're coming out of college or the work world, who have passion around sustainability and stuff like that. Any advice for them? How do they turn what, for a lot of people is just like a head nod. Yeah, I'm in favor of green stuff, sustainable stuff, etc. How do you do what you've done, which is turned it into a viable, growing business?
The good news is I think there are tons of opportunities to combine impact with a real business. I think the easiest place to find good opportunities is to look at energy efficiency, because that's an area where cost savings and sustainability almost always align. So for this kind of like environmental goal in particular, looking at energy efficiency around how a certain product or material is made or how it's distributed, that often yields a lot of that often yields a lot of opportunities to both basically help save money and make an impact. And when you're saving money, there's a good chance that you'll be able to attract customers. But I'd say more broadly, for mission-driven founders or aspiring founders, whether that mission is environmental or social or related to anything else, I think it helps to keep an open mind about what industry you'll operate in. Like, I personally never sought to work in the beverage industry. I still, it's funny, I go to these beverage industry conferences now, and I'll sit in on sessions where people are talking about flavor trends and new types of brands that are appealing to users or customers. And candidly, like, I find myself not really caring. I actually don't love the beverage industry at all. But I'm in it because it's a great place to make an impact. So one way to kind of abstract that out might be to look at the industries that are doing the most damage. Like, for whatever your personal mission is or whatever your goal is, look at the industries where you have the worst offenders and think about, how could you create something better? Like, how could you create a solution that that would right some of the wrongs? And that's probably a great place to look.
That's a fascinating way to look at that and give yourself some direction. Industries that are doing the most damage. I want to shift gears a little bit, if we can. Back to you as a person, as an entrepreneur. If you had to finish the sentence, somebody says, Sean, what drives you? And the answer is what?
It's actually a couple things. So I'd say over like a long period of time, it really is the impact. Like the mission over a long period of time really does drive me. Over the nearer term, if it's like, hey, this week's going to be really tough, or this month's or quarter is going to be really tough, and we've got to double down and hit our numbers, it's just this like unexplainable desire to like win, like just this like desire to succeed and hit the goals. Like, I think I've always been very goal oriented, and once I've committed to the goals, I have this like weird personal need to like achieve the goals, which isn't necessarily very healthy, but that's just how it is. And then what I will say that I didn't expect about entrepreneurship that ended up being surprisingly motivating to me is just creating good jobs for people. We hear a lot from our employees that Bevi's the best place they ever worked. We had a lot of employees who, especially during the pandemic, left and then chose to come back. And often when they came back, like a big part of what they missed was the culture and the mission and the impact. And I've really enjoyed getting to create jobs for people. Like in my job, I've had to like lay off a ton of people, which has been miserable. But I've also gotten to give a lot of people raises and promotions and more responsibility and like good learning opportunities. And that part has been it's been like surprisingly motivating to get to help people in their careers.
That's so you've there was a show years ago called The Wide World of Sports. And they always opened up, talking about from the thrill of victory to the agony of defeat. And you've had both that experience of those giant layoffs and creating impactful and meaningful jobs for people. Looking back, if you could have changed any decision in your career, what do you think you would have changed?
I would say at Bevi in particular, my biggest mistakes were typically related to hiring, and they were typically related to hiring people who were actually like quite talented, but just the wrong fit, or lacked experience where we most needed them to have it. Like often it was with stage specific experience where we would look for people who were very accomplished and very impressive, but in environments where they had a lot more resources than they were going to get at Bevi. So I'd say my biggest business mistakes were around that. And I've tried to get a lot more disciplined about hiring and like really clarifying exactly what skill set and experience set are we looking for. Also, I think I've been guilty of not focusing enough, like trying to take on too many initiatives at once, and maybe choosing 5 major initiatives in a year and having them all go okay, rather than like picking 2 and having them be very successful and putting more resources behind them. I think I've struggled with that a little bit.
Yeah, I hear focus underneath that. And you ever, we as entrepreneurs, we're often giving advice more from getting lots of advice. I know you're surrounded by advisors, investors, etc. As you look back, was there any advice you were given that you didn't take and you wish you had?
I'm trying to think of a particularly relevant experience, just because I've gotten so much advice and I've sought a lot of advice over the years. I would say that in our early days, I was encouraged to think more about sales and distribution strategy and to kind of pick one strategy. This goes back to the focus, I realized. Pick one strategy and really build the company around that. And we ended up designing our company to have multiple sales and distribution channels and multiple pricing models for each channel. And at a small scale, that complexity was fine because we weren't doing that much business and it was all fairly easy to manage. But at a bigger scale, I'd say it has really added challenges, as for each pricing model, each distribution model, there ends up being quite a lot of work involved in maintaining each one, right? When there's a financial systems upgrade, when there's a software upgrade, when we're changing our sales or marketing approach, there's more to change. So it can create this something equivalent to tech debt. It can create this like large backlog of work that basically makes it harder to be nimble. So if I were to start another company, I would definitely think about how to kind of choose one path and really like choose one sales path or one sales model and really go big on that.
Well, even though you may view that as a path you wish you had taken, the path you have taken has produced some pretty good results. And before my final question, how many Bevi machines are out there right now?
Okay, so we never publicly reveal our number of Bevi machines for competitive reasons, but it's a lot. It's like, yeah, it's a lot. We do talk about our number of customers, and we have just about 6,000 unique customers.
Wow. And when you say unique customers, is that 6,000 brands or logos or?
Yeah, it's like 6,000 companies
wow.
who have Bevi. Although it's because some companies have one Bevi machine and others have hundreds.
That's serious. Well, Sean, I really, really appreciate your help and insights, and huge congrats on what you've built and weathering the COVID storm in a pretty amazing way. My final question is, other than family members, is there a person you'd like to thank and why?
Definitely my co-founders, like Eliza and Frank, who started the business with me, and we are pretty lucky to have stayed friends over the years. Frank is actually no longer with the business full time, but Eliza is. and she's become like truly one of my best friends, almost like a sister. And that's just really lucky that they've been able to put up with me no matter if I'm at my like most intense or most stressed or most nervous. Like they've kind of seen it all over the years, and not only have we like continued to work effectively together, but we've continued to stay just really, really close as friends. And I feel really lucky that they have stuck through the journey.
Well, having, as you know, having partners is like being married. And in this case, you had two spouses there. And for that to end well is a testament to you, no question. Thank you again, Sean. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Onward and upward, and excited about the European expansion. We'll get you back in a year to see how that went.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you all for listening. I highly encourage you to visit our website to find many more just like it. We'll be back soon with another interview.